I knew this day was going to be bad the second I saw him leaning back in his chair like some kind of discount Bond villain, twirling a cheap pen between his fingers. The blinds were half closed, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and that smug little half smile on his face was practically begging me to reach across the desk and smack it off. He didn't even offer me a seat, just gestured with his chin like he was granting me an audience. Then, in that condescending tone he's perfected over the last 6 months, he says, "I need you to erase your files. They belong to the company now." For a second, I thought maybe I misheard him. I mean, erase my files? This wasn't a cluttered desktop with cat memes and vacation photos. This was 12 years of payroll infrastructure, carefully built, secured, maintained. The keys, the schedules, the compliance checks, all of it. So I asked, slow and deliberate, "You're saying you want me to delete the payroll system files?" He gave this little scoff, the kind people give when they think you're being dramatic. "They're not the payroll system files. They're just your old stuff. Clutter. We're moving to a team-owned approach so no one person controls things. You've been holding too much close to the chest." And there it was, that little jab meant to paint me as territorial, outdated, the bottleneck in his shiny vision of collaboration. It's funny, 97% of you are probably hearing this and nodding because you've been there. You've had some new manager stomp in, flex their little power muscles, and demand things they don't understand. And hey, if you're one of those people listening without subscribing yet, maybe hit that subscribe button. Keeps this crew motivated to keep sharing the kind of stories that make your coffee taste better. Back in that office, I could feel the heat rising in my neck, but I kept my face neutral. I've learned over the years that the calmest guy in the room usually wins. "Just to confirm," I said, looking him straight in the eye, "you want me to delete the file?" He smirked, nodded, and went back to flipping through some printed report like the conversation was already over. He couldn't know that in that single nod, he just signed the death warrant for his career. The file in question wasn't just a file. It was the file, one containing the encrypted master key that allowed our entire payroll system to process transactions. Without it, nothing moves. No direct deposits, no printed checks, nothing. And because of compliance laws and security protocols, there was no magic restore button, no handy backup floating on some cloud server. That key existed only on a secure local drive, regenerated once every few years, and I was the only authorized administrator. I thought about all the times he'd dismissed my emails about maintenance windows, brushed off my concerns during system updates, or taken credit in team meetings for streamlining processes that I'd spent months designing. This wasn't just arrogance, it was reckless ignorance wrapped in a cheap suit. And now, he wanted to bulldoze my work, not because it was broken, but because it bruised his ego that something important didn't have his fingerprints on it. So I smiled, kind of smile that probably looked like agreement to him. "All right," I said, and walked out without another word. The walk back to my desk felt like slow motion. Each step was heavy with decision, but the clarity was like ice in my veins. I sat down, typed a few commands, and there it was, the little blinking cursor waiting for me to confirm deletion. My finger hovered for a second, not because I doubted what I was about to do, because I wanted to savor the moment. I entered the final command, pressed return, and the file was gone, just like that. 12 years of hidden, intricate machinery reduced to nothing in a couple of keystrokes. I logged the action in the audit trail exactly as it had happened. File deleted per manager instruction. No embellishment, no emotion, just facts. The kind of entry that would be read later and hang in the air like a noose. From across the floor, I could hear him laughing with another manager about finally cleaning up old clutter before heading off for his mid-morning coffee. I leaned back in my chair, closed my laptop, and let the hum of the office settle over me. The first domino had been tipped. The rest would fall soon enough. There wasn't a long, cinematic pause where I sat there agonizing over my choice. No swelling music, no moment of moral crisis. I'd been collecting mental IOUs for years, every insult tucked away like a bent nail in a coffee can, waiting for the day I needed to build something sharp. He just handed me the lumber. My mind went back to the first week he started. The man couldn't tell the difference between a secure access protocol and a coffee order, but within 2 days, he'd stood in front of the department bragging about streamlining payroll ops with changes that were literally my work, renamed. A month later, he called my documentation paranoid redundancy. In a meeting with the CFO, my documentation, the one that had saved us from a payroll glitch during a banking outage. And just last quarter, he'd made a point of excluding me from a meeting about the new benefits vendor, only to email me afterward for a quick favor, setting up the vendor's secure data exchange. Those slights weren't just annoying, they were little neon signs flashing. This guy doesn't respect the systems, the people, or the stakes. And now here he was, telling me to erase the one piece of the puzzle that kept every paycheck flowing like clockwork. I looked at him, my face a mask of neutral compliance. "You want me to delete the file?" I asked again, this time making sure my tone was flat enough to skate right past his ego without catching. His head bobbed in that lazy, distracted nod, the kind people give when they think you're asking something obvious. He didn't even look up from whatever quarterly report he was pretending to read. That was the moment, the quiet click of a trap being set. I wasn't just following an order, I was engraving his signature on it. There's a certain shift that happens when you move from being on the defensive to realizing you hold the blade. It's not adrenaline, it's colder than that. It's the steadying calm that comes when you see the exact sequence of events that will unfold, and you know you can walk away at any point, but you won't. I thought about the audit logs, the compliance protocols, the legal safeguards, about how our system wasn't like a Word document you could pull out of the recycle bin. That master key file existed on a secure local drive for one reason: to comply with federal and state payroll regulations. There was no cloud backup, no shadow copy. It could only be regenerated with my written authorization, and only after a multi-step verification process that took weeks. That was by design, my design, and he wanted it gone. My hand rested lightly on the edge of his desk as I gave the smallest of nods back. "All right," I said, like I was agreeing to toss out a stack of outdated memos. I turned and walked out without waiting for further instructions, because there were none to give. On the way back to my desk, I passed a couple of coworkers who gave me the polite, tight-lipped smiles of people who don't want to get caught in the blast radius of a manager's bad mood. They had no idea they'd be feeling the aftershocks within hours. I slid into my chair, opened the secure access console, and stared at the directory where the file lived. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not in hesitation, but in appreciation. This was more than deletion. It was the pivot point in a very long game. I had been accused more than once of over-engineering security measures. That's what people say when they can't imagine consequences beyond next Friday's happy hour. But payroll isn't about happy hours. It's about mortgages, car payments, and keeping the lights on for 2,000 families. Every safeguard I'd put in place had been tested, retested, and locked down until the system was as tight as a drum. And the master key was the heartbeat of it all. With a final glance toward his office, empty now, chair spun halfway around like he'd left mid-thought, I made my decision official. The cursor blinked, waiting for my command, as if it knew the gravity of what I was about to do. One keystroke and the countdown would begin. The man who thought he was consolidating control had just handed it to me on a silver platter. Cold calculation had fully replaced the initial shock. There was no going back, and honestly, I didn't want to. The order was his, the fallout would be his, and the silence when the payroll stopped tomorrow, that would be mine. The file sat there in the directory like a dusty light switch in a forgotten hallway, small, unimpressive, and the only thing keeping the whole place lit. No flashy icon, no dramatic name, just a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to anyone without the map. I'd named it that way on purpose. Payroll master key encryption protocols are like safes inside safes. You don't label the final combination TOP secret payroll KEY unless you want to make a hacker's day. I pulled it up in the secure console. A couple of green bars flickered on the screen, the kind you get when you're inside a part of the system most people never see. My hands moved without hesitation, 12 years of muscle memory guiding each step. Select. Confirm. Authenticate. There's no fanfare when you delete something like this. Just a short confirmation prompt and the quiet blink of a cursor after it's done. That's the part most people don't understand. Real damage is quiet. I took my time with the audit log, typed out the entry as if I were writing an invoice, deleted payroll master encryption file per manager instruction. Nothing more, nothing less. No adjectives, no editorializing. Just a clean, clinical line that would sit there forever in the system's records. Because one day, very soon, someone was going to read that sentence out loud in a room full of executives, and there would be no mistaking whose fingerprints were on the trigger. I double-checked the deletion, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted the reassurance. The directory was empty. The heartbeat was gone. Without this file, the payroll system was a locked vault with no key, no money in, no money out, not for 2,000 employees, not for anyone. For a brief moment, I leaned back and let my eyes drift over the office. The click of keyboards, the hum of the printer, the distant rattle of the old HVAC system, all of it felt strangely separate from me now, like I was watching through glass. Around me, people were just living their Tuesdays. Coffee cups, Slack messages, someone laughing too loud in the break room. No one had any idea the fuse had just been lit under the entire building's financial machinery. The satisfaction was quiet, not gloating, not adrenaline, more like the stillness you get after tightening the last bolt on a machine you know will work exactly the way you designed it. I'd followed his order to the letter, documented it, and left no trace but the one that pointed directly back to him. I locked my terminal and stood up, out of habit. I slipped my phone from my pocket and snapped a quick photo of the audit log on the screen, not because I needed it for protection, but because I liked the symmetry of keeping my own private copy. Insurance. A coworker walked past and asked if I was heading to lunch early. I just smiled and said, not yet. My boss was still in the building, somewhere between here and the break room, thinking he'd just asserted dominance over a stubborn employee. In reality, he just asked me to cut the brake lines on his own career, and I'd done it with all the precision of a surgeon. I sat back down, opened my email, and drafted a quick, innocuous message to my personal account, audit log attached for records. Then I forwarded it, attached the file, and archived the message. The job was done. The vault was locked. The key was gone, and the man who ordered it still had no idea the walls were about to close in. He strolled out of his office like a man who just closed a big deal, not like someone who just lit his own career on fire. I could hear his voice carrying across the floor. He's never mastered the concept of an indoor tone, telling another manager how he was finally cleaning up old clutter and getting everyone on the same page. The other guy laughed politely, the kind of laugh you give when you're trapped in a conversation you didn't ask for. I didn't even have to see them to know my boss was leaning in, making those exaggerated hand gestures, milking his own story for maximum ego inflation. I turned back to my screen, opened the secure console one last time, and exported the audit log. It was barely a kilobyte in size, just a few lines of cold, hard truth. My own handwriting was in there, plain as day. Deleted payroll master encryption file per manager instruction. Didn't matter if you were a junior IT tech or the CFO, there was no ambiguity in those words. I attached the file to an email addressed to my personal account. Subject line, for records. No explanation, no commentary. Just a timestamped piece of evidence that would be worth its weight in gold before the day was over. A couple of clicks, a quick check to make sure the attachment was there, and I hit send. The email slipped off into the ether, away from company servers, tucked safely in a place only I could reach. Then I closed the laptop. Not just the screen full shutdown, no status lights, no soft hum from the fan. Silence. I sat there for a moment, letting the glow of the monitor fade from my eyes. It was like the quiet right before a thunderstorm, when the air feels heavy and the horizon starts to darken, but no one else seems to notice yet. From my desk, I could still hear snippets of his voice, something about finally modernizing the department. He had no idea the system was now a beautifully useless ornament, still ticking away on the outside, but unable to move a dime when payroll time came. It was almost poetic. The man who thought he was cleaning house had just boarded up all the exits. I swiveled my chair toward the window. The parking lot was bright in the midday sun, a few people walking to their cars, oblivious. Inside, the office buzzed along in its usual rhythm, phones ringing, printers chattering, the occasional burst of laughter. Everything looked normal, which made the truth feel even sharper. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about the years of slights and stolen credit, though God knows there were plenty of those. This was about watching a man dig his own grave with a smile on his face, completely unaware that the shovel had my fingerprints all over it. I leaned back, hands folded loosely in my lap, and waited. I didn't need to rush. The clock was on my side now. In a few hours, the machine would sputter and die, and the first people to notice would be the ones with the most to lose. My part was done. His part was just beginning. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the break room door swing shut and the hiss of the coffee machine kicking on. He was probably adding extra sugar, savoring the taste of what he thought was a win. I almost wished I could see his face later when he realized what that win had cost him. Almost. I heard him before I saw him. His laugh was louder now, that post-coffee, sugar-hit arrogance in full swing. The sound cut short mid-sentence when he turned the corner into our row of desks. The rhythm of his footsteps faltered, like he'd just spotted a rattlesnake coiled on his keyboard. The head of HR was standing by his desk, arms crossed, pressed into a line so thin it could slice glass. Right next to her was the CFO, a tall man whose usual calm carried a kind of quiet authority. Today, though, his face was the color of copper paper, and the set of his jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth. Morning, my boss said, though it was very much not morning anymore. He forced a smile, but neither of them returned it. The CFO didn't move. He just stared at my boss with this steady, unblinking gaze, like he was trying to decide whether to start the conversation here or wait until they were somewhere with a door. From my desk, I had a perfect side view of the whole scene. I didn't turn my head, didn't lean in, just let it play out like background noise while my eyes stayed on the blank screen of my laptop. But inside I could feel that delicious shift in the air, the way power moves in a room without anyone saying a word. My boss wasn't steering this anymore. He just walked into a meeting he didn't know he was in. "Can we speak in your office?" the HR director asked, and it wasn't really a question. She didn't wait for an answer before heading toward the glass-walled corner space he liked to brag about. The CFO followed, hands in his pockets but shoulders rigid, and my boss trailed after them like a kid being summoned to the principal's office. I knew in that moment that the first domino had fallen harder than I'd even hoped. The audit log would have been found by now, the absence of the payroll key noticed, and the implications would have started to dawn on them. But the CFO's ashen look told me something else. He wasn't just annoyed. He was worried. Payroll wasn't a hypothetical problem in the distant future. It was tomorrow. A couple of coworkers glanced up as the three of them passed, then looked quickly back at their screens, probably sensing something was off. The office was still buzzing with the usual ambient noise, but it felt different now, thinner, sharper, like the moment before a glass tips off a table. My boss closed the office door behind them, and the blinds shifted just enough for me to catch glimpses of their silhouettes. The CFO was doing most of the talking, HR standing to the side, arms still crossed. My boss's hands were up in that defensive half-shrug, probably trying to spin this as a misunderstanding or some proactive cleanup initiative. But here's the thing about a missing payroll master key. There's no proactive explanation that works. Either you don't know what it is, which makes you incompetent, or you know exactly what it is and you deleted it anyway, which makes you dangerous. Both are career enders. I leaned back in my chair, stretching just enough to release the tension in my shoulders. It wasn't gloating, it was alignment. The satisfaction of watching reality rearrange itself so the truth was finally the only thing in the room that mattered. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the CFO gesture toward the door, and then the three of them emerged. My boss's face was tight now, the smirk gone, eyes darting to see who might be watching. He glanced in my direction for the briefest second, but I gave him nothing. Just an empty, unreadable expression, the same one I'd given him when he gave me the order. He walked past without a word, but the silence trailing behind him felt heavier than anything he could have said. Somewhere, deep down, he must have started to feel it, that cold realization that something was wrong, and it was only going to get worse. They didn't even make it back to his office before the first crack split the air. The CFO stopped just shy of his desk, turned to face him fully, and asked, flat, calm, almost conversational, "Where's the payroll key file?" For a second, my boss just blinked like he'd been asked where he left his sunglasses. Then his eyebrows pulled together, the corners of his mouth tightening. "What payroll key file?" he asked, voice lifting in that fake confused tone people use when they're stalling. The CFO didn't blink. The encryption key that unlocks the payroll processing system. My boss shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the defensive smirk creeping back in. "Oh, that thing? Obsolete. I told IT to clean it up this morning. It's just old clutter." The CFO cut him off with a small shake of his head like he was physically brushing the words aside. "Let me be very clear," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Without that file, we cannot process payroll for anyone. Not tomorrow, not next week, not until it's rebuilt. And rebuilding it isn't a matter of clicking restore. It takes weeks and it requires compliance sign-off." I didn't turn my head, but I could see it from my peripheral, the way my boss's posture changed, the way his shoulders dropped half an inch as the first kernel of reality cracked through his ego. Still, he tried to double down. "Well, surely there's a backup somewhere," he said, spreading his hands like it was obvious. "There isn't," the CFO said. He didn't raise his voice, but it had that slow, deliberate cadence of someone tightening a vise. "For security reasons, the master key is not stored on the cloud, not mirrored on external drives, and not replicated off the secure local system. That's the law, and you'd know it if you'd ever read the compliance protocols." The quiet in the office had a strange weight to it now. Conversations a few desks away had slowed, voices dropping as people started to notice the tension radiating from their corner. My boss was glancing around, probably realizing that whatever this was, it wasn't going to stay contained behind a closed door. Inside, I was savoring every second, keeping my face neutral and my body language loose. If anyone happened to glance at me, they'd just see someone scrolling through an inbox. But every word, every pause in that exchange was like a slow sip of the finest whiskey. The CFO took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough that I had to strain to catch it. "We have 2,000 employees expecting paychecks tomorrow morning. Direct deposits, paper checks, contractor transfers, every single one depends on that key. So let's try this again. Where is it?" "I told you," my boss said, his voice hardening now. "I had it deleted. It was part of the cleanup initiative." And there it was, the moment he said it out loud. No hedging, no euphemisms. Just the admission, framed exactly the way it would appear in the meeting notes, the HR report, the inevitable email chain that would follow. The CFO straightened, his expression unreadable now. "Then you've just created a company-wide payroll crisis," he said, each word landing like a hammer on steel. The conversation moved past me then, toward the cluster of HR, IT, and finance people starting to gather. But I stayed perfectly still, watching from the corner of my eye as the ripples began to spread. The problem was no longer theoretical. It had a time, a place, and an audience, and my boss had just made himself the starring act. The CFO didn't waste time. He motioned to one of the IT leads who'd been lingering nearby, clearly already looped in, and within seconds 2 more techs were at my boss's desk, opening terminals, pulling up directories, scanning every storage path they could think of. It was like watching firefighters kick down doors in a building you know is already burned to the ground. The first one tried the standard backups, local mirrors, scheduled snapshots. Nothing. The second tech checked the compliance vault, but the access logs showed what I already knew. The master payroll key had never been stored there. By law, it couldn't be. Federal and state payroll regulations made sure of that. Only the active, single-instance key could exist, only in one place. Lose it and you start from scratch, that was the point. "Try the offsite archive," my boss said, a little too quickly, like a man hoping to guess the right door before anyone notices the walls closing in. "There's no offsite archive for the key," one of the techs replied without looking up. His voice was steady, but you could hear the edge in it, the awareness that this wasn't a simple fix. "That's a compliance violation. You'd know that if you'd read the system specs." I sat at my desk, breathing slow and even, hands folded loosely on the table in front of me. Outwardly, I was the picture of professional detachment. Inside, I could feel each failed attempt like a precise twist of the screw. Every no, not there, and that directory's empty was another turn of pressure against my boss's already cracking composure. The HR director had pulled up a chair now, jotting notes with the kind of deliberate neatness that made you think she could be writing your resignation letter without missing a word of the conversation. The CFO kept his arms crossed, his gaze locked on my boss like he was watching a slow confession take shape. "Check the dev server," my boss said, his voice sharper now, the veneer starting to peel. "Even if it was there, it wouldn't work," another tech said, finally looking him in the eye. The encryption protocol is tied to the active key's unique signature. You can't just copy-paste it. It's not a password, it's a cryptographic handshake between the key and the payroll processor. I let my gaze drop to my keyboard, just enough to hide the faint curl of a smile. Because here was the part none of them had said out loud yet, the part I knew was coming. My employment contract, the one he'd never bothered to read, stipulated that the encryption protocol could only be regenerated with my written consent. It was a safeguard the company had agreed to years ago after a near disaster with a former contractor. The clause was buried deep, phrased in dry legal language but ironclad, which meant even if they wanted to rebuild the key today, tomorrow, or in a week, they'd need me. In writing, on paper, and I had no intention of giving them that for free. The IT team kept moving, cycling through increasingly desperate options. Old code repositories, temp folders, even a couple of dusty external drives pulled from a storage closet. Each time, the answer was the same: empty, incompatible, or useless. The room's tone shifted from urgent to grim. Even the people who didn't fully understand the technical side could read the body language. My boss tried to stand behind them, peering at screens, muttering suggestions, but no one was really listening anymore. The attention had shifted to the CFO and HR, and to the dawning realization that this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a financial and legal time bomb set to go off in less than 24 hours. I sat there, still and silent, letting the tension spool tighter, knowing that every passing minute made the trap harder to escape. The noose was in place. All it needed now was a final, public pull. The low murmur of the search effort broke when the CFO's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, answered without stepping away, and said a few clipped words I couldn't catch. Then he hung up, looked at my boss, and said, "The CEO's on his way." That line hit the room like a change in barometric pressure. People straightened in their chairs. The IT lead stopped typing. Even the HR director's pen froze over her notepad. My boss tried to play it cool, but his Adam's apple bobbed once, twice. When the CEO arrived, he didn't bother with greetings. He stepped into the room like a man walking into a fire he'd been warned about too late. "Someone tell me," he said, voice low but sharp, "why I just heard that tomorrow's payroll is in jeopardy." His eyes locked on the CFO, then flicked to my boss. "Start talking." My boss launched into it immediately, leaning on his usual strategy of speaking fast and overloading with half-truths. There was a legacy file, clutter really, that I instructed IT to clear out this morning. It turns out it may have been tied into some older system functions, but older system functions? The CFO cut in, his voice suddenly louder. It was the encryption key for payroll processing. Without it, nothing moves. The CEO's gaze sharpened. "Is that true?" My boss hesitated just long enough for the silence to become an answer. "Technically, yes, but there's got to be a backup somewhere, or there isn't." The CFO snapped, cutting him off again. "For compliance reasons. We've been through this." He didn't even look at my boss as he turned toward the IT lead. "Show him." The projector screen came to life, a pale rectangle on the wall. A few keystrokes later, the audit log filled the display. Clean. Time-stamped entries scrolled until one line appeared, perfectly centered, highlighted for emphasis. Deleted payroll master encryption file per manager instruction. The room went still. The CEO read it once, then again. Per manager instruction, he repeated slowly, his eyes never leaving my boss. "You gave that order." My boss's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It was misrepresented to me," he said finally, his tone shifting to something almost pleading. "I wasn't told it was still critical. That's not how this works," the CFO said, his voice dropping to a colder register. "You don't get to erase the foundation of a system you don't understand and then act surprised when the building collapses." From my seat, I let my gaze drift to the screen, expression neutral, heartbeat steady. I'd been waiting for this, the moment when the trap snapped shut in public, with an audience that mattered. This wasn't just a quiet HR chat anymore. This was the CEO, the CFO, IT, and HR all in the same room, staring at a line of text that could end a career before lunch. My boss tried one last pivot. Maybe the file was mislabeled. The CEO stepped forward, one hand resting on the table, leaning just enough to close the distance. "Don't insult us," he said. "It's your name on the order, your voice on the meeting log, your decision that's about to cost this company 2,000 paychecks, plus whatever legal fallout comes with that." The silence after that was dense enough to feel. My boss's shoulders slumped just slightly, the first visible crack in his defiance. And in that moment, with the evidence hanging on the wall like a framed confession, I knew exactly how this would end. The humiliation had gone from private to corporate record, and there was no climbing back from that. CFO didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just turned toward my boss, slow and deliberate, with the kind of precision you'd expect from a man about to set a blade down on a chopping block. So he said, each syllable measured, you ordered the deletion of the one irreplaceable file we need for tomorrow's payroll. Why? It landed in the room like a thunderclap without the noise, just impact, heavy and final. Every eye turned to my boss. The CEO's expression was unreadable. HR's pen hovered midair. The IT lead sat frozen at the keyboard. Even the air conditioning seemed to hush itself. My boss opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. The bravado, the smirks, the practiced corporate spin, all gone. His face drained of color until he looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. Why? The CFO asked again, softer this time, which somehow made it worse. I thought my boss's voice cracked on the first syllable. I thought it was obsolete. No one told me. No one has to tell you not to pull the foundation out from under a system you're responsible for. The CEO cut in, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. That's your job to know. HR shifted her notepad to the side, folded her hands, and spoke for the first time since the meeting began. Given the immediate operational impact and the nature of the decision, we'll need to discuss your role here privately. She didn't glance at me, but she didn't have to. The subtext was carved into every word, you're done. The CFO leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching my boss as if the man might spontaneously combust. We're now facing a company-wide payroll freeze because of a decision you made without understanding its consequences. That's not a leadership issue. That's a liability issue. The CEO didn't need to say anything else. He just gave a small nod toward HR and she stood. Let's step into the other room, she said, her tone flat. My boss glanced around the table like someone looking for a lifeline in a storm and finding none. Finally, he stood, shoulders rounded, and followed her toward the door. 2 members of security were waiting outside. They weren't dramatic about it, no grabbing, no raised voices. Just one on each side, walking with him as he left the conference area. It was quieter that way, but everyone watching knew what it meant. The door shut behind them, and for a moment the room stayed silent. Then the CEO turned his attention to me for the first time. You know how to fix this, he said, not a question but a statement. I met his eyes, kept my voice level. On my terms. He didn't blink, just nodded once, like a man who understood the cost of winning an unwinnable game. The others in the room looked between us, sensing that the balance had shifted, but no one spoke. I leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the moment settle. The man who thought he could strip my work from me was gone, escorted out without his badge. And I was still here, the only one who could open the vault, the only one who could get 2,000 people paid. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just closes the door behind you and leaves you sitting at the head of the table. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.